Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about health of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia. Together we have Qing Peng, Danyang Wang, Yutong Wu, and Ziyi Xu to present this. Aboriginal Australians are legally recognized as people accepted by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. As a formerly colonized nation, Australia has always valued and protected the Aboriginal people who were burdened with such a history. However, there are still large health inequalities between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups and non-Aboriginal groups. Evidence suggests that Indigenous Australians have a 10-year lower life expectancy in comparison to the rest of the Australian population and have twice the mortality rate for all age groups. Therefore, in this presentation, we will analyze how historical background, culture, and ethnicity and social determinants affect health and try to propose ways to promote health and well-being among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Okay, so in this section, I will introduce historical context of Aboriginal and Torres Islander peoples in Australia. Boston University 2017 stated that history as a determinant of health. Historical factors, war and migration may influence the long-term health of a population. Blackmore 2019 points out that the slaughter and exploitation of indigenous people by British colonizers and the taking of their lands had many negative effects on their health and well-being, such as lack of access to mainstream society, education, employment, and healthcare. According to Australians Together 2021, from the early 1800s to the present, legislation and national policy have forced Indigenous people to move from their homes to preserves, missions, and cattle farms. They live their daily life under a system of surveillance control and lack of freedom as eco-citizens, making them one of the most socially excluded groups. They also state that the colonial policy of assimilation of Aboriginal children from 1910 to 1979 forced the generation of Indigenous children to accept the white culture and were forbidden to speak their traditional language, which also led to the destruction and trauma of Indigenous culture. At the same time, from 1940s to 1960s, Aborigines were granted exemption certificates that required them to sacrifice their Aboriginal identity in exchange for the same fundamental freedoms as other Australian citizens. It became a form of status discrimination that left many Aboriginal families and communities with a distrust of authority.
Next, I will introduce the culture and race of the Aboriginal Australia. It is undeniable that the history of being colonized has brought unendable trauma to indigenous culture. What's more, Aboriginal and Torres Islander people also face health problems due to culture and ethnic differences. As mentioned before, the White Australia policy implemented by the Australian authorities alienated Aborigines from their indigenous culture, causing great physical and mental harm to Aboriginal parents and the children. After that, the Australian government took many measures to remedy the damage to the Aborigines. For example, Australia's National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Plan 2013 to 2023 recognizes the indigenous cultures, recognizes the importance and the impact of health, and targets a human rights-based approach. However, due to cultural differences in communities, which the indigenous extended family structure is the opposite of the nuclear or linear family structure common in Western societies, it is difficult for authorities to recognize or understand the structures and concepts in indigenous families and communities and to work with and build relationships with the indigenous families to improve their health. In addition, as the Australians Aboriginal are brown people, the great racial discrimination also has a negative impact on the health of the Aboriginal people, who suffer irreparable psychological and physical damage.
Social determinants of health include factors such as socioeconomic status, conditions of employment, power and social support, which work together to enhance or undermine the health of individuals and communities. Australian Human Rights Commission indicate that Aboriginal people in Australia are at a socioeconomic disadvantage in the main indicators. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people consistently have lower average income from both employment and private sources than non-Indigenous Australians, and they are more likely to live on low incomes. Obviously, compared with low-income families, families with a higher income level usually have lower levels of pressure to meet them basic living costs, and there are more choice in food quality, housing, physical exercise, social participation, and healthcare. Third, lower socio-economic disadvantage may lead to poor health and well-being outcomes. Additionally, employment is another key determinant with an overall difference of 27 percentage point between the employment of Aboriginal and non-Indigenous Australians. In the national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders health surveys in 2018 to 2019. This is mainly due to the fact that Aboriginal Australians are less likely to complete university than non-Indigenous Australians. However, higher education strongly associated with higher earning and career success, so that they are largely included from sentence highly skilled job levels. As a result, they have to suffer the health disadvantage of low income levels. Finally, Indigenous people do not have equal access to primary health care and sanitation infrastructures such as safe drinking water, effective sewage treatment system, and healthy housing in terms of social support. This is due to lack of access to mainstream services, low rates to access to health services, including primary health care and inadequate provisions of health infrastructures in some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders communities. Understanding the structure and concept that access in Indigenous families and communities, building relationships and cooperating and increasing services and programs are therefore important to reduce accessing health inequality. In conclusion, Aboriginal and Torres Islander Australians still face historical disadvantage, cultural and racial segregations, and health inequality caused by social decisive factors. Approach to Aborigines. Funding for Aboriginal health continues to be uneven, and Aborigines demand clear political and official answers to their health inequality. It is important to maintain community customs that support people's cultural beliefs and tradition and give them a sense of belonging while maintaining personal continuity and cultural identity. And government needs to recognize that good socio-economic status is a condition that promotes inclusiveness and introversions. Finally, in order to ensure the protection of the health of Indigenous people, it is important to ensure that Indigenous people understand the link between trauma and health and allocations of resources in situations, and inform them of health program, supplies, and knowledge of some disease. Thanks for watching.